Good morning. Looking at the comments that have popped up here whilst I went and got my coffee. Burton, g'day Burton. Which shaver do I use? I don't know. It's a cheap one off the shelf, I don't know. That's all right. I'm not only stumped for answers, but there you go. It's a comment from Antel here. What a week, Troy. What a week. What a week. Oh boy. I was just telling Charlotte before I came over and did this, I might be a while today. It might go on for a while. But let me start with the sponsor, brand new sponsor this week. So I've got Mega sponsoring me this week, which is really, really cool because I genuinely love what Mega does. Now, I use Mega. So this is Mega as in the Mega file upload, cloud storage, encrypted stuff, which many people probably heard of before. I use Mega probably every single day. A lot of my stuff is stored in Mega, particularly as I sync things between machines and I back stuff up in the cloud, which is fantastic. So they are a brand new sponsor this week, world's largest provider of zero knowledge, E2E cloud storage plus chat, 200 million users who enjoy privacy on Mega. You can try Mega for free as well. I have actually been paying Mega for some years, so it's nice to get a little bit back from Mega by having a sponsor there this week. So please do go and check them out. They do offer a fantastic service as well. So good stuff there. Now, a couple of things here. Lance, good morning, mate. Nathan, did you see the stuff about Ubiquiti and opting out of tracking this week? So the only stuff I've seen with Ubiquiti this week is my network partially stopped working. In fact, I just tweeted about this about 5 minutes ago. And I know what I was going to do, actually. You know how for like technical people, the one thing that fixes everything is to reboot it. So I took an update to Ubiquiti yesterday. It's a fairly major update, a whole bunch of dashboard changes and things. And my primary network, which is the one that say, and let me clarify, my primary Wi-Fi network, which would be the one that things like my phone are on, is no longer broadcasting SSID. My IoT network, no problems. Everything's working beautifully on the IoT network. But it's kind of frustrating because I'm wandering around going like, why isn't my phone on the network? And I did actually reboot the Dream machine, didn't come back up. Someone suggested rebooting their access points worked fine. Now, I've got one that sits here next to my desk, and if I pull the network plug and I power cycle it, that's just one access point, but hopefully I'll actually see the network reappear on my phone in a couple of minutes. And then I can power cycle the switch, which does the PoE to every single other device. And right now, someone's probably going, there's just a button to like automatically reboot all your access points. And if there is, let me know in the comments, and then I'll work that out later on. But to the actual question just here around Ubiquiti and opting out of tracking, I have not seen that. And I take it the timing of that might align to the new network bits. So if you have a link to that, can you drop it in these comments and I'll come back on later on and have a look for that. Okay, so moving on, because there is a lot of stuff here, and I tweeted about some of the things I was going to cover, but I forgot one of the first things here that's sitting in my list. And I can't even remember if this is new or not. I'm going to drop it into archive.org. But Home Assistant, which I'm so fond of using these days, for all of my IoT things, is integrated into phone passwords, which is really, really cool. And I tweeted, I have a feeling that this has actually happened before. And I'm going to mute all my things here as well at the moment. Now, the integration point here was we're using Havabane Phone Service for detecting leaked or compromised credentials like passwords. If you get a warning about it, it means you are using a secret in your configuration, which may have been leaked and are publicly known, and is strongly advised to change these secrets with a more secure alternative as soon as possible, which is really good. I'm really, really happy to see that. Archive.org actually doesn't have that link archived anyway, so maybe that is a new one. So really, really cool stuff there with those folks. Now, incidentally, and I'll check my figures now, but Phone Passwords is rapidly heading towards 1 billion with a B queries per month, which makes me very, very happy. And let me have a look. What is the actual count? 897 million queries in the last month, and it is still trending upwards as well, which is really, really cool. I'll have more to talk about with that as well. I know, Bert, and you in particular, one of the people who keep asking me about open sourcing, have I been pwned? This is the first bit that's going through that process, the pwned passwords piece. It is lengthy and time-consuming and complex for all sorts of reasons I didn't even suspect, but I'll talk about that when I can talk more about the situation. Question from Brian here. Are you using Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi or Linux or a PC? So I am using it on a Raspberry Pi, and it's sitting down in my server cabinet, and I honestly just never, ever even think about it in terms of running on a Pi. I just never even touch it, which is great. And David says, when you started with home automation, did you also look at OpenHAB versus Home Assistant? To be honest, there is such a strong pull from just about everyone to Home Assistant. One of the most active open source projects, full stop, in GitHub as well. And there's just so much community support for it that I can't imagine looking at anything else at the moment. Okay, let's move on to data breaches, because this is where both my time and my sanity is going to go today. We're gonna leave the one that robs us all, I think, of the most sanity till the last. But let's start with VPNs. Now, full disclosure, I have a relationship with Nordvpn, a very reputable VPN provider that does actually take privacy seriously, unlike some of these other ones. Now, someone sent me some data the other day from several VPN providers, two of which, so this is not the whole lot, there's more coming, two of which were Vpn and Gecko Vpn. Now, in case you've never heard of Vpn and Gecko Vpn before, well, firstly, that's probably for the best. Secondly, they are free VPN services, and they are free VPN services with Android apps. Now, you always got to ask the question, and I ask this a little bit cautiously as someone who does provide a free service, being have I been pwned, but when someone provides a free service, what is the motivation? Now, I don't necessarily like the saying that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, because again, that's not the case in something like have I been pwned. But I do question the motivation. I know my motivation, but when you have someone providing VPN infrastructure for free, what is the MO there? Now, if you were to go over to your Google and search for SuperVPN, the only thing you find with SuperVPN, you don't find a website, you find the app on the Google Play Store. SuperVPN, free VPN client, contains ads, offers in-app purchases. Well, there's part of your monetization strategy. And then you scroll down and you get to the bottom and there's a developer website. It says visit website, and the URL is supervpn.best. Is that like two superlatives in one go? Super best VPN. Anywho, so you go there and it automatically redirects you back to the Google Play Store on the same app, which is just bizarre. So there's that. Now, someone made the comment, and I'm not sure how they concluded this, but they said this was either a Hong Kong or a Chinese mainland-based service, which does make you wonder when people are offering to proxy your traffic for you. And then if you go to Gecko VPN, it's basically the same thing, but SuperVPN has got 1.5 million users of the app here. And then the data breach or 1.5 million, I guess, downloads of the app. The data breach I loaded between SuperVPN and Gecko VPN, and let's just do the numbers on Gecko VPN as well. So Gecko VPN, again, Play Store, only about 45,000 users on that. But again, same sort of deal. Free VPN, contains ads, offers in-app purchases. You go down to visit the website. It's geckovpn.xyz. So that's their TLD. Sounds legit. You go there, and then that redirects you also back to the Play Store. So yeah. Anyway, so in there was just over 20 million unique email addresses, which is quite a large number, particularly given the download numbers on the apps. And I think part of the reason for that might have become clear when I pulled the stats on how many of these email addresses were already in Have I Been Pwned. So normally I would see 60 to 70%, give or take 10-ish%, unless it was a very localized kind of app. So there's been things like an Indonesian e-commerce site with a very low hit rate, because obviously it's just a very different demographic to what's appeared in a Dropbox and LinkedIn and all the other big breaches. But this was about 8%, and 8% is exceedingly low. And looking through the email addresses, it wasn't like sometimes you'll go through email addresses and there'll be a whole bunch of sort of random strings, or there'll be one particular domain which appears really extensively. So, for example, there was one a little while ago. I think it might have been NetGalley, where there was a lot of Kindle email addresses, because NetGalley was related to people reviewing books, and obviously you could get it delivered to your Kindle, so your Kindle address would go in there, which is, probably not someone's primary email address. But this one looked like generated accounts that weren't just like randomly generated, almost like generated names. And my gut feel from looking at the data is I suspect that there were a lot of accounts in there that people, that a small number of people had generated in order to proxy traffic through the VPN. And, it's a free VPN, so probably low overhead in doing that. I can speculate as to why they might be doing that. So anyway, those two are now in Have I Been Pwned. There is at least one other one in the pipeline still to come. So I'm just going to take a sip of coffee and look at the comments here. So Techno Wolf says the email contact for SuperVPN is goanalyticsapp@gmail.com, which was an app that was removed from the Play Store for privacy issues. Now, I always like to try and link to news pieces on these things. So when I link into the SuperVPN story, there's a story here on cybernews.com about one of the biggest Android VPN hacks, data of 21 million users from 3, and remember, I've done 2. There's another one coming. Android VPNs put up for sale. And as I went down the rabbit hole looking into this, I found other articles about basically just like uninstall SuperVPN right now because of privacy concerns. So I would go and get Nord. It's a very cost-effective strategy, and at least they're going to look after your data. So again, affiliation. All right, so moving on to something else. Actually, something, while I think of it, last week I talked about monitor calibration. So this is my monitor calibration tool, the Spider X. And these are kind of cool because they like hang off the back of the monitor and they look at the monitor like that. There's a little lens there. And there's a little calibration process that takes you through guidance around setting the brightness of the screen, and then it creates a monitor profile around colors and things. And I did it last night with 2 of my screens. I didn't do it with that one because the cable is not long enough. The cable is probably about 1.5 meters. So I've got to get an extension. However, when I did it, it was like your brightness is way, 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 way too bright, reasonable. And it turned it so far down that I look at it now and everything looks dark. And I do wonder how effective this calibration tool is. So I need to spend a bit more time with that. So if I'm sort of squinting at the screen, trying to see what I'm seeing, it's because everything looks abnormally dark at the moment. Now, other things here. Next breach, Oxfam. All of these breaches this week have interesting stories behind them. So here's the Oxfam story. January, must have been January. I got a DM from a reporter, and the reporter linked me to a hacking forum, which was talking about the Oxfam data breach. Now, I do avoid naming any particular site or forum because I don't particularly want to see data spread even further. But I'm just going to try and find this one, and you'll see the relevance in a moment. A lot of this disappears, but then it's cached. So we can go to a cached version here. So anyway, reporter sends me this this link to the breach. And I have a look at it, and he's like, what do you think? And I'm looking at the column names and things because someone has literally just copied and pasted the create scripts. And it's like, okay, yeah, it looks like a normal breach and everything. And I replied quickly because I remember I was at a coffee shop waiting for my coffee. And then I looked at it again a little bit later, and it's like, holy shit, like that's my data. So someone had taken my record out of the Oxfam data breach and dropped it into this particular hacking forum as a proof of legitimacy. And that was fun. I mean, keeping in mind, I've been in, I don't know, like 25 data breaches or something already. So it's just another day on the internet, really. But obviously, I don't even know if it was like a funny thing or what it was. But anyway, they chose to use my data. Made it a bit easy for me to verify, I'll give it that much. And it was old information. It was information from an address at least, for how long have I been here? 5.5 years ago. And Oxfam, for those who are not familiar, is a charity. And this was a breach of Oxfam Australia. You and Oxfam tackling poverty together. So I can't even remember it, but obviously I'd made a donation to Oxfam at some time. And my data went into this system, and it then appeared alongside many other people's data. And it was being sold, it was being monetized. And then, as tends to happen with this, data gets monetized for a period of time until either enough people have it that it just leaks out anyway, or the value of it goes down, and then whoever grabbed the data in the first place then just leaks it publicly. So this data got leaked publicly, and it appeared three days ago to a week ago, somewhere around there, on the same hacking forum, freely available for download. So I went through and pulled that 1.8 million records in there, including my record. So that was a bit unfortunate, particularly for a charity as well. And I'm going to talk, as I get into this next breach too, about the impact on organizations. But, you know, like this is a charity there fighting poverty, and breaching that organization takes resources away from really important life issues such as solving poverty, and it directs it into people that have to try and deal with this stuff. And that's everything from the public media statements I have to make, through to contacting subscribers, through to the phone calls I had with people at Oxfam as we tried to get to the bottom of how much data had actually spread around. So yeah, I just lament the fact that I know it sounds silly, but there's no morals around who will get hacked and for what purposes. So that's a little bit upsetting, but that is also another day on the internet. So that's breach number 1 that I was in this week. We'll get to number 2 at the end of this section here as well. There's Lars. Lars dropped in. Speaking of leaks and passwords, did you see the announcement MS Ignite about passwordless authentication with Azure AD? I'm not sure which one you're referring to and which ones I've seen or not seen. We might catch up on that later on, Lars. But yes, passwordless is the buzz with challenges. Next thing, ticket counter. Now, I didn't know what ticket counter was until someone reached out and sent me ticket counter data. Now, ticket counter is a Dutch platform which zoos and amusement parks then use to sell tickets. So if you're, let's say you're a zoo in Rotterdam and you want to sell tickets to your zoo, rather than building your own platform, you use ticket counter, and people come to the zoo and they leave their information there and they buy their tickets, and then back-ending the zoo is ticket counter. So someone sent me that data, and it was a little bit unusual because it was a backpack file, a .bacpac file, which is a SQL Server backup. Now, what's the correct nomenclature? It's like a SQL Server export. It's not like a .back file, which we'd often have if you just back up the database. So anyway, it's a .backpack, which is a little bit unusual. And I restore that into SQL Server, and it's another data breach, except it's just obviously all of the tables and all of the data in its original schema format. And it's not like a dumped CSV or a .SQL file or something like that. So I get in touch with them, and I had multiple discussions with the CEO on text and also on video. So we spoke quite a bit, and it was very, very fascinating. And I'm just going to sort of pick how much I want to say, because I'm trying to remember A, what the discussions were, and B, what is reasonable to now say in a public audience, to a public audience. I think what was fascinating about this, and look, there have been many, many, many occasions in the past where I've disclosed to organizations and then had conversations with people behind them. But what's always fascinating is seeing what is the impact on the individuals inside the organization. And this was a company, I won't say the exact number, but with dozens of employees. They're by no means a big company, probably classified as a small company. They've just gone through COVID, which has been really, really stressful on any organization. And now they've got this. And it was the typical sort of, the data is for sale thing, same sort of situation I just mentioned with the Oxfam. But then they were being ransomed as well. And they have said that publicly. And there was a ransom demand for, let's just say, some number of Bitcoin. And like, imagine the stress on this guy. He's trying to run a business. He's trying to keep his staff employed. Someone stuffed up royally, and they've said this publicly. They've said they took a production backup in order to test some anonymization processes in a staging environment. And this is an absolute stuff up. They put it in an Azure storage account, which had public access on. This happened in August last year. It took until February this year for someone to stumble across that. So they have well and truly acknowledged fault on this, and good on them for actually owning up to the fault as well. The next one we'll talk about organizations that don't want to own up to the fault. But it was also one of these cases where it's never just one thing, right? Like, they took the database back up, they put it in a publicly facing storage account. They didn't put a password on it. They were using production data to test a process, which is always going to be a big no-no because stuff like this can happen. I wrote years and years and years ago about generating anonymized data with a SQL data generator from Redgate. So that's, there are ways of generating this data without needing to have the real live public stuff. So they made a series of errors and the chickens came home to roost, so to speak. But again, it was just, it's sad, like, seeing the impact on genuinely good people trying to create good services, and someone just turns around and monetizes that. The thing as well is that, particularly when you get to ransoms, if the person responsible for that is identified later on, and we are talking about the Netherlands, and the Dutch police have actually been very, very good at locating people lately. They were very, very involved in things like the Emotet botnet takedown. If you get found trying to ransom a company, it's going to be quite a different situation to simply just selling their data, which also is highly legal as well. So we'll see how that pans out. These are the sorts of things which do sometimes catch up with people. All right, Gab. Let's talk about Gab. Now, I did a long one of these videos some weeks ago, early in the year, about Gab and Parler. And we got to kind of look at this in two ways. There is a whole political discussion, and where does your sentiment sit in terms of what is free speech versus what is inciting violence, what is put under the Nazi banner, what is a lot of other emotive words that are used, and all of this sort of emotional stuff over here. And then there's another bit here, which is just the nuts and bolts of a data breach. And I've tried very hard to focus on the nuts and bolts of the data breach. And I'd say probably 90% plus of what I've said and done is the nuts and bolts of the data breach. And then there's a little bit here, which is the inescapable commentary about the nature of the service and the nature of the people on there. And the reason it's inescapable is largely due to just being sucked into discussions which, well, I'll just read some of the tweets and then you can figure it out for yourself. So there's a blog post on this. But going back a little bit, remember Gab is touted as a free speech platform. Now, in fairness to them, what they're really saying here is that the bar for when they will remove content is set very differently to, say, Twitter and Facebook. So we know that Twitter, for example, removed Trump's account because they said he was inciting violence. Now, the bar in Gab would be very different. He could say the same things on Gab and it wouldn't be removed. And I really don't even care too much whether he should have been removed or not removed. This is just the nature of the platform. They want to give people more free reign about the things they say. It is not completely free in that you can say and do anything. It's not free speech as in you can get away with anything and there are no repercussions. This was the big point I was trying to make in my previous video when I went into this. Regardless of your political leanings or your views or anything like this, there is a point at which everyone will say, yeah, that probably shouldn't be on there. And even Gab does have content guidelines, I forget what they call them, but it's on their terms and conditions page. Really good examples are things like copyright. You can't just simply take someone's content and then reproduce it all yourself. It's not free speech to be able to do that. Not all speech is protected, not in the US and not in other parts of the world as well. And even that distinction, the US versus other parts, is something very important that I'm going to come back to. So Gab has a lot more free reign there, and that's fine. Now, what tends to have happened is that as speech has been cut down on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, a lot of people have been unhappy with that, and they've moved over to Gab. So Gab has become a place where the disenfranchised have moved, and we've seen the uptick in numbers. Gab themselves have been very public about how much their platform has grown. So they've got about 4 million users at the moment. And what you're really doing is you're getting a lot of people of the same views. And one of the points I make towards the end of this blog post is, look, let's take Facebook. Facebook has got 2.7 billion active monthly users. 2.7 billion. 190 million of them are in the US. Now that's 7%. So 93% of the people on Facebook are like me, not in the US. Of that 7% that's there, the 190 million, obviously 190 million is a significant portion of the US population. So you are going to have a whole spectrum of different political views, different religious views, different reviews on gender and sexuality and everything else. So there is a broad spectrum of people there. Now, what's happened with Gab is it is a slice of that audience that is almost entirely US. Unfortunately, there's not enough data in the breach to be able to nail that down, but you can very, very easily tell just by reading through the content there. And then it's almost exclusively Republicans, and it's very, very heavily orientated towards, I think one of the words I saw used was hardcore Christians, with very, very consistent views around everything from climate change to vaccines to mask wearing to abortion. And again, that's fine, but we can't sort of confuse Gab or conflate Gab with other social media platforms that have a massive variety of different views and backgrounds and nationalities. So Gab is very specifically one thing. And if you go to Gab and all you got to do is just have a scroll through the content on the Discover page, let's do that now just for fun, and you get a very, very clear view of the demographic. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying it's wrong to have that demographic there. What I'm trying to point out is that when people say, look, this is an alternative to Facebook or something like that, it's a very, very different beast, and it's an echo chamber of the same ideas. So we scroll through. This is on the /explore. And incidentally, if you have not been to Gab, go there, create an account, have a look at it. It is interesting because there is a big mass of people there. It is just interesting to see other people's perspectives, even though I don't agree with a lot of them, and that's fine. Number one here on /explore, just in, Dr. Fauci rips state's decision to end mask mandates is just inexplicable. Now, of course, Texas, for about the 96% of the world that's not from America, and I realize I'm doing this at a time which is US friendly, so a lot of people watching this are probably from the US. The Texas governor just repealed the mask mandate so that you don't have to wear masks out in public, and I think he's repealed a few other things around controls to basically keep people from spreading the disease. So inevitably, the Dr. Fauci thing here, he's not real happy with that. What do we got here? We've got a politician here. Every single American should be outraged by this. Democrats just voted to ban voter ID nationwide to force every state to permanently expand mail-in voting. So this is obviously anti-Democrat. The next one here, DOJ drops bombshell about Hunter Biden investigation. So something negative about the son of the new president. The Epoch Times. We're not going to get along, but I think the president deserves a lot of credit, and he's not going away, Kemp said. Says... Georgia government Kemp says he would absolutely back Trump for president in 2024. Someone else here, Major Patriot breaking. House Representatives has less the capital. Not quite sure what that means. Someone else here, I haven't used Amazon for almost 3 months and I don't miss it one bit. All right, cool. So this is something that's got nothing to do with politics or religion or any of the rest of it, which is good, but it is rare. And if you go through Facebook or something and you see the same kind of stuff, I'm going to see people's cats. I'm going to see someone's brewing some beer, and there's going to be all of this other variety. So we've got to be really, really clear about the demographic here. So that is the first point. So Joseph here says, you're not improving a point. Well, the point is pretty obvious. If you spin through it, you'll see it's very, very American, right-wing, politics, religion. Spin through somewhere like Facebook, and you get a big variety. That's the point. All right, so moving on. The data breach. So obviously, any big online platform, Joseph, I am going to remove you. Fixed. And in fact, I'll come back and talk about that later on. All right. So any one of these platforms that is online is going to get a lot of attention from people trying to break into them. I mean, we just talked about Ticket Counter. We talked about Oxfam, a charity helping poverty. So all of this stuff is very, very positive in terms of the things that it does for society. They are targets of hackers. Facebook is targets. Twitter's target. Gab is obviously a target as well. So it's almost like the ultimate meritocracy. Like everybody is going to get targeted. I've just seen Scott join in. Here comes the crazy. So Scott, because you have a spanner next to you and you are still a moderator, use your spanner as necessary, and then I'll come back and I'll talk about some of the people that are arguing just crazy stuff in a moment. So everyone's going to get targeted. Now, some of them are going to be breached. And to be clear, it doesn't matter whether you like or dislike Gab. If people are breaking through a protected system and extracting data, that is hacking. That is, in the US, going to violate the CFAA. There are serious repercussions for that. So let's be clear. I don't want to encourage anyone to hack Gab any more than I want to encourage them to hack Oxfam or anything like that. So this is illegal activity. If the people get caught, there's going to be serious repercussions, particularly in the US. But as we know, data breaches happen. There are 514 data breaches in Have I Been Pwned before Gab went in there. So this is going to be an ongoing challenge for any online platform. Now, what can we tell about the data once it's happened, and what are the series of events that led up to this? So I did a tweet thread a few days ago. When was this? March the 2nd, 3 days ago, my time. And I want to talk about what I said in here because it's kind of crazy. So I've quoted the CEO, Andrew Torba. Now, one of the things that is also different with Gab to many other social media platforms is that the Get on Gab Twitter account, actually, one of the things that's different about it is they don't allow replies to most of their tweets. So Twitter's got that feature it's had for a little while now where you can disable the ability for people to reply to a tweet. And that's what Gab does because not so big on the free speech when it's on the Twitter side of things. So the CEO's tweeted the other day, and I am going to self-censor a little bit of this because I did have people mention to me later on that I need to be cautious using this word, even when it's just quoting this guy. Mentally ill, and then I've heard it referred to as the T-slur, mentally ill T-slur, which is related to transgender people, demon hackers, and then in brackets I'm very serious, are attacking Gab right now. Now, I'm not quite sure exactly how he's drawn the conclusion that the people that he's pointing the finger at here are the ones breaking into the system. Unfortunately, Gab hasn't actually shared a lot of information about the breach. But to say mentally ill T-slur demon hackers is... You don't normally see that from the CEO of a social media platform, do you? Anyway, he was a little bit too direct on that. So that's kind of where it kicked off. Now, he was referring to someone who is transgender. The demon hacker, I think, might be related to the fact that this person is a bit goth. They've got dark lipstick and some piercings. But like, honestly, who cares? And I think this is one of the things that just upset a lot of people, where an incident around security and hacking somehow becomes derogatory statements about someone's appearance, gender, or sexuality. And they're just things that should never enter into the narrative. So it goes on. So I tweeted that and I said, this is where the bizarreness starts. Now, Gab actually released a statement around this time. In fact, it was a few days earlier, 26th of Feb, about an alleged breach. And this appears to be in response to an interview that Andy Greenberg from Wired did with the CEO. Now, Andy is a very top-notch journo, and he's a really, really decent bloke. I've spoken to him a number of times. He's done stories on data breaches and things that I've covered or reported. He's a good person, you know, and he's done really, really noteworthy things. One of the things I remember the most is he did that story about Jeep hacking, where someone could actually alter the firmware on a Jeep and take over some of the physical controls, and Andy's sitting in the Jeep while the Jeep gets run off the road. Really, really interesting stuff. So anyway, there's that. And what seems to have happened here is that the CEO has not been real happy with Andy reaching out and has said a bunch of pretty crazy stuff here. Now, in this statement, they've said things such as they couldn't find any public discussion about the breach, so they assumed that Wired reporters were essentially assisting the hacker in his efforts to smear our business. So that's just nonsensical. And the reason it's nonsensical is that there is so much stuff that happens with data breaches behind the scenes before it goes public. Now, the ticket counter thing is a perfect example. I had multiple discussions with the CEO over many days before there was anything out there in the public domain. This is normal. This is what happens. It is not something which happens sort of behind closed doors and then it's somehow happening behind closed doors, but you can Google it and find it, which is just, it's just absolute nonsense. So that was a very, very strange thing to say. And then the bit on passwords. This is what I find particularly fascinating. And one of the people, I'm not even sure if it was the guy who just interjected in the comments there, but one of the people is trying to argue with me about password hashing. So the statement that was made in the Gab blog post here is, it is standard practice for passwords to be hashed. This is good. If the alleged breach has taken place as described, your passwords have not been revealed. Now, this is just a fundamental misunderstanding about how password hashing works. And I don't think that we can expect someone like the CEO of a social media platform to necessarily understand the technical nuances of it, but this is why you have people review your statements for accuracy before you release them. Now, I've said this is misleading and ignores the simplicity of hash cracking. And what we learned once the data was sent to me is that the hashes were stored as bcrypt hashes. Now, bcrypt is a very good password storing or password hashing algorithm. It's bcrypt, work factor 10, maybe a little bit low on the work factor, but let's cut them some slack. The problem is the way password cracking works, if you have a list of plain text candidates, so passwords which could actually be used in the service, and you go through and you hash each one of those and you compare them to the hashes in the database, and one of them matches, there's the password. And in fact, I embedded an example here where when CloudPets had their data breach years ago, same work factor on bcrypt actually, I went through and I demonstrated that, look, you can actually crack a bunch of these, partly because the password rules on CloudPets were so weak. So they allowed the password of QWE, look at your keyboard, you'll see why. They allowed the password 123456. They allowed ABC123. So I created a very small password list. I put all these in as plain text candidates, bcrypt hashed them against each one of the hashes. And incidentally, bcrypt does include a salt in it as well. And that's fine, because even on my PC just here, which is not particularly designed for hash cracking, I was still calculating something like 700 bcrypt hashes a second. So I managed to go through and demonstrate in the CloudPets case that, look, you can actually crack hashes. So this whole statement here about your passwords have not been revealed is just completely false. And later on, I do go through and show, look, you can actually reveal some of the bcrypt hashes from Gab in exactly the same fashion. Now, this is important, and this, if we get away from the politics and everything, is what upsets me about the data breach. There are 4 million people in this breach. A subset of those have email addresses. I think I found a total of 60,000 something email addresses, including mine. So it is a small subset. And also a subset have password hashes. I think it was something like 7,000 hashes. Now, to be clear, that is just what is in the corpus of data that was sent to me. I don't know how much more data there is outside of that. All that I know, and all that Gab absolutely positively knows now, is unauthorized parties had access to their database and they extracted a whole bunch of user accounts and hashes. They haven't sent a data breach disclosure notice. They haven't asked people to change their passwords, and they certainly haven't forced any resets. And that is just unexplainable. Like that just doesn't happen at this stage of the breach disclosure process, where it's already public and it's in the news and it's searchable and have I been pwned, all the rest of it. It's just absolute batshit crazy. So we go on. In their statement, they said it is entirely possible for a user of the site to be unidentifiable based on the information they provide at login. Now, I said later on, look, I actually don't disagree with this statement. It is entirely possible for a user of the site to be unidentifiable based on the information they provide at login. That is entirely possible. And just, sorry, I just sent a comment here. Would it be possible next time to share the screen you're reading or looking at? So I'm just going to drop it in the comments. It's just the most recent blog post on my blog at the moment. So let's go there, drop it in. So if you go to that blog post and you scroll down to the embedded tweet with the Gab login screen, this is where I am. Now, the login page, you log in with your email address and your password. So when you, thanks, Scott. So when you have to log in with an email address, the statement about people being unidentifiable based on the information they provide at login really doesn't make sense. It is possible because people might have gone and created, let's say they went and created like a Proton Mail account and they took measures to ensure that they were not identifiable based on the email address, and the email address wasn't like Troy Hunt at Proton Mail or something like that. You know, they fabricate an address, okay, fine. That would make it hard to identify the person. That is unusual. So most people of all social media platforms are going to sign up with their real email address. If you log in with your real email address, you're not going to be unidentifiable. In fact, email address is considered personal identifiable information. It's literally how people send you messages. So that statement just didn't make any sense either. And again, this has got nothing to do with the politics and the religion and all the rest of it. This is just the mechanics of how systems and data breaches work. They go on. In our subscriber records, we do not collect health or financial information. We do not collect dates of birth. We do not collect, and then I've just gone blah, 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 blah. So they're talking about all the things they don't have. And this is not unusual for an organization to downplay the severity of a data breach, not by talking about the things that they've lost, but by talking about the things that they didn't lose. It's like, we didn't lose social security numbers because as far as I know, they don't collect them. Health records, because as far as I know, they don't collect them. You very often see companies say, we did not lose your credit card data. And I always find that a bit of an odd thing because in my experience, and I have had a bit of experience with having credit cards defrauded in the past, in my experience, you go, ah, shit, my credit card got defrauded. And you call up the bank and you go, hey, someone's got my credit card. And they go, no problems, we'll cancel it for you. New one in the mail in a few days, we'll refund the money too. Multiple times this happened to myself or my partners at different times, and money comes back, new card, no problems. So this is real misdirection. And the point I've made here, and this is where the sort of the sub 10% of my commentary was a little bit more political. I've said, when you've just had your neo-Nazi hate speech associated to your email address, DOB is the least of your worries. And what I'm saying here is that the Gab leak includes all of the public posts associated to a username. It includes 4 million accounts with usernames. Roughly 40-something thousand of those have an email address next to them. Now, if you've logged onto this platform, you've decided that you don't want to let your email address be seen publicly, but you've used a real email address, and then you've used some anonymized handle to do all the comments over here, there is now the data there to tie all this back together. And this is what's really, really concerning, because regardless of your view about the politics and everything like that, if people come to a platform with an expectation of privacy, and then you have a data breach which then erodes that privacy, that is a really, really serious issue. Now, I made the sort of the hate speech comment because per my earlier points, Gab has attracted a lot of people who can't say the things they want to say on a platform like Facebook because they get booted off. So they go to Gab and say it. And you don't have to scroll very far to see stuff that for many people, they would not want to have associated back to their identities. So the greater risk is not something like date of birth, which has probably already been leaked in multiple other data breaches. It is things like the nature of the speech and what that will mean for people in the future. Will that impact their ability to get a job, a relationship, their credit record in some cases, depending on where you're around the world? All of these things are actually really important. And the thing about a data breach like this is that it is immutable. It has happened. It is out there. You never put the genie back in the bottle. When people ask me, look, can I remove my data from the internet? It's like, well, that's trying to remove piss from a pool. So like, no, you can't. Now, someone did say to me once, they said, well, you could drain the pool. It's like, yeah, well, I guess you could drain the internet too, but good luck with that. So they go on. Every major tech company from Facebook to Twitter has been the target of multiple and continued breaches. It's partly true and partly not true. I said earlier on that every online service gets targeted And that is true. And Twitter and Facebook have certainly been targeted. To the best of my knowledge, and no one's been able to prove otherwise here, there has never been a dump of data from either of those social media platforms in the way that we've just seen from Gab. SQL injection, a whole bunch of internal records, usernames, passwords, email addresses, private messages, which are in Gab. We haven't seen that from these platforms. And even if we have, it's still a strange statement to make. And it's not just Gab that makes this statement. There are other platforms that have made this statement as well. And it is, again, trying to downplay the severity. It's like, well, all the other kids are getting hacked. It's like, is it such a big deal that we got hacked? Those guys got hacked and those guys got hacked. Everyone's getting hacked. It can't be that bad. What about just saying, like, sorry, we fucked up our code? Like that would be a really good start. And I wrote a blog post about Breach Disclosure 101 a few years ago. And I was looking at how the Red Cross Blood Service had done their disclosure. And that was another one that I worked on with the organization involved. In fact, a lot of it ran through AusCert because they had an association to the Red Cross Blood Service. And that was one where there was obviously a lot of effort that went into just simply apologizing for their mistakes. And to this day, that data breach disclosure notice and the transparency of the CEO and the way they communicated is sort of held up as the gold standard for how to communicate after breach. Many organizations, including Gab, are like literally at the other end of the spectrum. All right, so I said, then there's the wide piece from Andy Greenberg, top-notch journal. I got a lot of respect for based on previous pieces and discussions I've had with him personally. And I sort of linked through to the wide story. And it's, look, read the wide story. It is just very, very factual. Here's what happened. Here's what we know. And that's it. Now, CEO Gab wasn't real happy with me after that. And he replied to my thread. He said, weak, pathetic, and emasculated men like you are why the West is failing. Now, I wasn't actually aware the West was failing, and I'm not sure if is that just West US, or is that, because Gab's very US, or is that broader West? He didn't qualify. And I had to Google emasculated as well, because I know the word and I know the connotation. Emasculation is the removal of both the penis and the testicles, the external male sex organs. Tell you what, for someone who's not real tolerant of people having same-sex relationships, he's sure focusing a lot on penis and testicles, isn't he? It differs from castration, which is the removal of the testicles only. How the hell do I end up here? Although the terms are sometimes used interchangeably. So anyway, that's what comes up first result in Google when you search for emasculation. So a slightly odd use of the word there. Anyway, so here in the thread as well, and this is where we're going to get just a little bit back to the other side of the discussion, which is less about the technical side of it and more about the nature of the organization, the people behind it. Obviously, he didn't have a good experience with Andy Greenberg from Wired. And I've been better to tweet here from the Gab CEO, and I still find it, A, just sort of unfathomable that he said this, and B, that the tweet hasn't actually been deleted yet. He says, as per my policy of not communicating with non-Christian and or communist journos, I will not be replying to this non-story. And he quotes the non-story in the tweet. And I just find it unfathomable for someone to even think that they would not communicate with someone based on their religion, let alone the CEO of a major platform that's just had a serious data breach, and they're getting legitimate questions from respectable journalists, and they won't communicate with them because they might not be Christian. Now, I did do a quick check because I was curious. I'm a numbers guy. About 69% of the world is non-Christian. So you do limit your opportunities when you're not going to communicate to 69% of the world. Now, of the remaining 31%, there might also be a portion of those who are communist, and he's not going to talk to them either. So why? At least they're all in one place, I guess. It's just insane. So anyway, there's that. Now, I put this in Have I Been Pwned. I flagged it as sensitive. Now, when it's flagged as sensitive, it is not publicly searchable. And I ended up having a debate with someone on Twitter, I think yesterday, on this. Might have been the guy who chimed in just before, where they said, oh, yeah, Troy's just gone and doxed all these people. Well, there's several problems with this. So number one is that when it's a data breach and the data is no longer in the original protected system and it is being distributed out to multiple different locations, as has happened with 514 data breaches in Have I Been Pwned before this and thousands of others before that, the data is now well and truly no longer private. It is out there in the public domain. So from the perception, perception of what is doxing in terms of identifying who the people are behind this, like that horse has bolted. Having said that, that horse also bolted with Ashley Madison, but I didn't want Have I Been Pwned to be the service which disclosed identities that were in Ashley Madison because it had serious social consequences behind it. It's the same with Gab. There is a very, very strong negative connotation in many people's minds about people being on the Gab platform because of the sort of behavior that I've just described from the CEO. Now, I'm on Gab. I have a Gab account, and I created the account when I was doing a lot of commentary about Gab and Parler because I want to understand what's going on there. People, without knowing my background and all the rest of it, could make the assumption that because I'm on Gab, I share some of these views. People could make the assumption that of the tens of thousands of other people or other email addresses that are exposed in the data that I have, and again, there could be the whole 4 million email addresses out there. I don't know. I can only go based on what's been sent to me. People could draw the assumption that the presence on Gab meant that you had the same sorts of views as a large number of people there obviously do. And I don't want Have I Been Pwned to be the platform that discloses that. This data will almost certainly appear all over the place, freely downloadable in lots of other places over time because this is what happens. Data replicates. Some people say it wants to be free, but I think that's a bit of a stupid term. It gets out there. So Have I Been Pwned is not going to be the platform that discloses that. So there is no doxing, so to speak, on Have I Been Pwned. You cannot enter the email address of a Gab user on the public page or via the API and get a result. You can go to the notification component of Have I Been Pwned, verify that you control the email address, and then it will tell you if your email address was exposed in Gab. You can go to the domain search page, and if you can demonstrate that you own the domain via either DNS record, file upload, meta tag, or you can receive an email to a standard admin address on the domain, then you can see it. But you already own the domain. You can already see the email that goes backwards and forwards anyway. So there is no doxing on Have I Been Pwned of Gab users. And this was one of the arguments yesterday. And again, I think it might have been the person who just popped by before. It does become a bit of a blur. I mean, even before this, I get enough shit on Twitter that it becomes a bit of a blur. But this person was making arguments, everything from just didn't understand how hashing works through to claiming that Have I Been Pwned was doxing people. And honestly, the nature of the way these discussions descended, and it's not just people who are on the right side of the fence in the US, it's people from the other side of the fence as well who are just getting really antagonistic and spiteful and frankly just bloody childish about this stuff. And it just honestly became a cesspool of children arguing. Like that's honestly the way that the tweet thread felt. And I came this close to just muting the entire thread and going and building some Lego or something. I've just spoken about people being children. But anyway, you know what I mean? Like just going and doing something else because it's just frankly bloody depressing. Okay, so where does that leave us now with Gab? I think the thing that has to happen next, and I suspect they're going to be forced to do this via US regulatory requirements anyway, is disclosure. So the people who are in the breach are going to need to know about it because there is uncertainty beyond the tens of thousands of email addresses that I've seen about how many people are impacted by that. It really needs to be everybody that gets notified. Passwords need to be cycled. There should be a forced reset because obviously it is possible to crack a bunch of those. And then they just need to get on with life. As much as I don't like what's on there, I don't think that Gab should be shut down. I don't think there's a legal basis to shut it down. I think people should be able to go and have legal conversations with like-minded people if they want to. It's not my kind of conversation. I'll leave it to them. But again, getting back to that sort of 90% of the commentary I want to make, they just simply haven't done the right thing with this breach. And they're not the only ones. There are many, many, many organizations before them not doing the right thing. I would like to see them do the right thing. And I think that they will be forced to over time. All right. I'm going to stop there a second and just read some of these comments here. What is in here? People listening to me normally on the podcast. What else is here? Interesting comment from a CEO that doesn't have the courage to admit a stuff up. I just don't think I even want to go further down that rabbit hole about his behavior. Gab seems to get under your skin. I think what gets under my skin is, and look, I mean, it does to an extent, and then I just go and I get interested in something else, and I go and my attention wanes and goes to something else. I think what gets under my skin, it's a little bit like watching some of the other debates you see online about something like climate change denying or something like that. You're just like, how do we have these people? Like, how can you have these views and live in a mostly civilized society? I think I'm just perplexed by it more than anything else. But I've got so many other data breaches to deal with and so many other things to move on. I'll be quite happy if nothing more happens from this Gab situation, and I just move on to the next thing. Do you have any take on the recent motherfucker? Did I say that right? Motherfucker cyber criminal database breach, and does it contain any innocent victim records or just bad guy stuff? Well, given I can't even pronounce it, I've not heard of that one before, and I honestly can't comment. So I really don't know that situation. Okay, so look on to the next thing, because there's another thing here on the list, which is also have I been pwned related. In less controversial news, Portuguese government is now the 12th government to be using have I been pwned to monitor all their gov domains. So this is something that I started doing for governments, primarily with the UK. UK and Australia came on board at the same time several years ago. Governments are just like any other organisation in that they have lots of people who end up in data breaches. What makes governments a little bit different is that, especially depending on which sort of government we're looking at here or which sort of government departments, it can be quite sensitive if they do have a data breach or if they do have people involved in a data breach, particularly if we're seeing things like passwords exposed, and we know how much people reuse passwords. So we might have, let's say, a department somewhere in the government in the UK, one of their people's in a data breach, they're using the same password for the UK government accounts as what they are for whatever it is that's just been breached. So that presents risk back to the organization. So I wanted to make sure that governments had access to data, which is why we sort of set this arrangement up. And governments, including now the Portuguese, the 12 governments, also including the US as well, the US, Canada, Australia, just to name a few, they have domain level API searches. And there is an allow list here. So in the case of Portugal, I think it's .gov.pt. So basically star.gov.pt and a small allow list of other discrete domains that don't use that TLD but are government domains. And they can go through and make any queries that they like against those domains without having to go through the manual verification process. And really this is to try and help departments that frankly need the support that they can get. Governments are always underfunded. In fact, the reason this whole thing kicked off is I was doing a user group in London. Yeah, it was London, and it was a really big one, hundreds of people there. And someone asked me towards the end of it, they're like, "Aren't the government always just there trying to get into your things and spy on you?" And this was sort of like Snowden stuff was fresh enough in everyone's memory that was the perception of governments. And I said to the person at the time, I said, look, in my experience, like every single government person I've dealt with, and Scott's on here doing a good job, Scott. Scott's on here as well, and he's spent a lot of time with these folks as well. And I think you'd echo my sentiments in that every single government person we've dealt with in the cyberspace has just been like a totally awesome person, like really, really good, genuine people who actually want to make a difference in the world. They're usually paid a fraction of what they would be paid in private enterprise, but they feel that there's a bit of a high cause. There's things that they can do to make the world better. And unfortunately, what tends to happen with governments is every time they screw something up And the Snowden leaks did highlight some pretty severe incidents of that. Every time they screw something up or they do something nefarious or negative, like it's all over the press. And I remember having a debate with someone sometime where they're like, government's always just spying on you and doing negative things like this. And I'd sort of say to them, well, what do you think of the examples of the things that governments have done well in terms of cybersecurity? And it's very, very hard to come up with an answer because the good stuff doesn't tend to get seen. The good stuff really happens behind the scenes. So the people were always very positive. And I gave this answer at the user group. And afterwards, someone from the NCSC in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre, came up and it was basically like, thank you, like we really don't get much positive recognition. And like everyone else, he was a super nice guy, and we struck up a good friendship there, which ultimately led to the NCSC in the UK, the ACSC here in Australia, and then 10 other governments subsequently come on board. And since this posted, another government has reached out as well, and I'll be able to announce them hopefully in the coming weeks too. So that's what's happened there. They are not government backdoors, so they only get access to their own domains. They're on my blog here for transparency so that everyone can see that the government is using it and this is the way they're using it. And that is about that. So hopefully we'll just keep expanding that out with more and more over time, and they can get useful data to do good things. Burton, the GCHQ is using AI to protect cybersecurity. I hope they're using next-gen blockchain as well. That would make me very, very happy. All right, so look, I have exhausted about an hour here already. I hope this has been useful. I hope that next week we can just focus on more mundane data breach stuff and less controversial stuff. I'm sure everything will settle down. It always blows over. So thank you very much for watching. I think I'm going to go and play with some of my IoT toys and just do something different that's going to be a little bit fun. And maybe I'll be able to talk more about that next week as well. Thanks for watching.